If you're new here, my name is Mango and I've got over 10,000 hours inside of UEFN. And in today's video, I'm going to share some of the best practices to follow when making custom UI. All of the resources that I make in this video will be available for completely free inside of my Discord server. You can join by following the very first link in the description. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is verse field bindings, and the first thing that you can do is go Window and then click Variables. This got recently added inside of Fortnite and it's called UMG. So what we're going to do is click the plus icon, and there's actually a bunch of different variables that we can choose. For this one, I'm going to do message, and I'm going to name this example message, and then I'm going to click the check mark. And all you need to do to link it is select a text block, for example, and on this text field you just click the chain link icon and then this verse variable here that we just made, and then click select. And so once you've got the verse variable binded to the widget, what we can do is we can easily update the text using this widget by just simply setting the variable that comes with the widget. And so I have a very simple script set up here where basically all it does is it stores a map of the players, and then when they spawn in, it adds the UI to their HUD. And then when the button gets interacted with, all I have to do is get their widget from the map and then set the variable that we exposed earlier in the widget editor. And so you can see here that I just have a simple button, and all through the power of verse, I am completely changing, I'm manipulating the widgets. And this is just a very simple example on what you can do with it. Something else that I wanted to talk about briefly is there have been a lot of confusion with certain bindings. And so for example, let's say you have a texture here, and I'm just going to put this on the canvas just for an example. But what you can do here is the way that you actually link this is, so let's go ahead and create a new texture. I'm just going to call this example texture, and make sure you do texture like this. And once you've gone ahead and done that, it'll look something like this, and you'll notice that you can't actually bind it to the variable directly. And so basically what we have to do is make the binding ourselves. So go ahead and make sure you have the image selected, click the plus button, and on the left side here, click brush, and then up here we are looking for the make brush from soft texture like this, and go ahead and bind it. And here you will find the texture that we just exposed. Go ahead and select it, and it's important here that you define the scale. So for example, this is 148. I'm just going to say it's 128 here. So we would basically, whatever the size is of the image, just go ahead and put that into these fields here. And it is the exact same process as I showed before. You just do set widget dot whatever the name of your variable is, and then that will update the texture. You can just pass it in. Alright, so for tip number 2, we are going to be talking about widget anchors. If you click on a widget and it is part of a canvas, you will find that there is anchors. There are 16 possible different anchors, and all of them mean kind of the same thing. It's essentially just saying where is the root of this widget going to be. So the reason why this is super important is because of the fact that you won't be able to guarantee the resolution or the aspect ratio that a player is going to be playing on. So by anchoring it in the position, you can see as I'm scaling it, it's staying in the same spot. And this is super good because I can't remember exactly, but a couple years ago, there was a bunch of talk in the developer community about how to correctly scale a UI when the aspect ratio is different. And I don't know if there's a way to actually scale it, especially if they have their settings changed. There's like some discrepancies there as well. But in general, you always want to make sure that if you make something, like let's say you make a shop, for example, and it's anchored in the center, make sure everything is anchored in the center. Because for this display that I have here, I just opened up one of my past projects. You can see that it all scales correctly, and they all scale together as well. But if I was to set the anchor, they're all in the bottom corner. If I was to set this anchor to the middle, you can see that now when I scale it, it's not actually following the rest of the thing. And so it's really important that when you're making a UI, you want to make sure that all of them are in the same position. So like this, I made sure that they're all in the corner and they're scaling correctly, no matter how weird the aspect ratio is. All right, so for this third tip, we are going to be talking about how to trigger animations with the Verse UMG bindings. So the first thing we're going to do is create a new variable, and this is going to be called play UI animation, and it's going to be of type float, and go ahead and confirm that. And I have an animation here that I already made. It's just a simple fade effect, and what you're going to do is open up the bindings, and once you're inside the bindings, we're going to go ahead and create a new condition, and we're going to find the variable that we just created, and if this is equal to 1, we're going to queue play animation like this, and we're going to click this link button, and we're going to find the animation that we just made. So right here, click select, and what I've done here is I just made a new function for playing the animation, and same thing, I just get the player, I get the existing widget, and then I just set the widget variable to 1, and then I wait for the animation to play, and then I set it back to 0. And I've also wrapped this in an animating logic, which basically just prevents it from being called multiple times over and over again. All right, so now that we're in game, you can see here that whenever I press this button, it just plays the animation that I made. And again, this is just a really simple implementation, but you can really do some cool things with this. All right, coming in at number 4, we actually have a really simple one. You might have seen this video before by someone named Skadank. They talk about how to make custom buttons using Verse. And one of the problems that they talk about is you actually can't select the buttons initially on controller. So to fix that, you have to go to the root widget. So in this case, it's WBP button. And you want to make sure that is focusable is enabled. Once you've done that, they will work exactly the same as if it was a pre-made button given to us by Epic Games. And I just wanted to throw this in here just because it's really easy and it helps a lot to know the little things when you're really pushing the limits of UEFN. And I'm honestly just really excited to see where things go and see what kind of tools Epic Games can give to us. But with all that out of the way, let's keep moving. All right, so for tip number 5, it's actually going to be a mini tutorial because I want to show you the power of storing widgets inside of a map because they are super helpful and it allows you to easily change everyone's widgets all at the same time. So inside of this script, I already have a map. A map is basically just an array of key value pairs. The key is the player and the value is the widget. So what we can do is loop through the entire map by passing in all the players, and as a result we get direct access to their widget, which is where we can update the values. So I've gone ahead and set up a very basic suspends function, and what we're going to do is first we're going to create a loop and we're going to sleep by 0.2 seconds. This is like an instant update thing, but there are some cases for like timers. If you want to have a global timer, you would just set this to be 1 second and then you would increment it. But for this example, we're just going to do 0.2 seconds, and we're going to first establish all players, and this is get play space dot get players. Below that, we're going to do for player ref of all players, and existing widget is equal to example widget map player ref as the key. And then what this allows us to do is we could just do set existing widget dot example message is equal to, and then this is where you could just put in whatever you want to update. So if you have some logic happening of like calculating score or a leaderboard or whatever you want it to be, if it needs to be updated all at the same time, you can achieve this with really simple for loops. And it's important that you spawn this at the on begin function, because if you don't actually start the loop, then it's never going to update people's UI. All right, so coming in at number 6, we are going to be talking about the best practices for textures that are going to be used inside of UI. So the first thing is we want to completely disable streaming for this particular texture because it is a UI element. So we're going to do no bitmaps. We want the LOD bias to be 0, and we want the texture group to be 2D pixels unfiltered. So normally what I see people do is have the UI texture group, which does work, but if you look really really closely at it, it has like this weird bleeding happening, and the way that you fix that is by setting it to the 2D pixels. And now, if you look, it got rid of all that gross bleeding and that blurriness, so we don't want that for UI. So after that, you're going to want to have the default BC1 or BC3 with A compression settings. And if one of the textures that you have is way too big, it actually draws more memory. So I highly recommend setting maximum texture sizes. So for example, if this image is set to 64 by 64, but the texture itself is 256, we can actually cut the memory usage by 75% if you just set it to whatever it's actually gonna be. All right, so for tip number 7, I want to kind of take a step back and think about more of a philosophy standpoint of how you should design your systems. So I'm going to draw something for you to help you kind of understand. So the first thing that you're going to have in your project is, of course, your game manager. And what I've seen people do in the past is they'll create one gigantic script that handles the UI for everybody. And so what I like to do instead is I like to make a custom UI class that is for the scope of one player, and I then pass in all of the information directly into the UI class, and then inside of the UI class I might have a function that is for like adding or removing the UI from the player, but it doesn't actually calculate anything, because what you might have in your project as well is a custom player class, and then this is where you could pass in the new information from if you don't want to do it directly from the game manager. But generally speaking, you never want to have a custom UI class that is crunching the hard numbers and running the calculations and stuff. It might output a new display, but that information that gets calculated should be passed in directly rather than handling it within the UI class. So for example, this is a keyboard UI that I made, and because of the way that I packaged it, I ended up writing the UI in a super complex state. And so what that ends up looking like is I have a function in here that is validate code type. That's all inside of here. There's a key pressed event, and so it ended up making more sense for me to include the code in this case, but I would highly advise against doing that, just because of the fact that, again, you really just want to keep all of your UI classes super simple. And a good example of how to achieve this is a shop UI that I created, and whenever the button gets clicked, all I do is signal an event that is handled by a manager script, and all of the calculations are done there for like handling purchases and awarding the item to the player. None of that is included inside of the shop UI. And something else that you'll see inside of the shop UI is that I'm setting all of the variables from a simple definition that gets passed in. So for things like this where you're just simply setting something, that's totally fine, but I wouldn't actually want to calculate anything inside of here. And I know I sound kind of repetitive, but this is a common thing that I see a lot of the time with beginner and intermediate developers. And ever since I started designing my UI with this new method in place, with this new kind of structure architecturally, I've felt that it's a lot easier to keep my code managed, and it's also just a lot smoother the more that you continue to build on top of it. All right, so coming in at number 8, we're going to be talking about how to design your UI dynamically. When I started creating custom UI inside of Fortnite, what I would do is I would manually have every single element of the canvas drawn like statically, if that makes sense. So if I had 10 buttons, I would make 10 button variables, and I would put that in as like this canvas slot is here and this canvas slot is here. And so what I found works a lot easier is actually just making one canvas and having a couple helper functions that actually draw it for you. And so something that I didn't really know is that a function can actually return a widget. So in this case, I have a shop UI and I have a parent function that creates the page for me. So the first thing that I would do is I would figure out what is a slot. So in this case, I wanted to display an item, and I passed in a item definition, and then I would create that that using the UMG variables that I talked about earlier. You just pass everything in. And then once I have the slot actually constructed, I will take that function and pass it into what will become a row. So then I have a stack box that will loop through, do a little bit of logic, and it will dynamically construct using that first function that we created. And stay with me here. I will then take that row function and I will use that to create the page, which is, in this case, it had like multiple rows. So basically what I do is I take the slot and then I turn that into a row, and then I turn that into the full page. And that is what I actually call inside of the canvas. And again, I really just think that this is the superior method to making UI. It's a lot faster. It's a lot easier to debug, especially because everything's handled and it's really concise. I mean, this entire shop script was like 299 lines of code. If I was to statically call 16 item slots and pass in all the information to every single one of those, it would be a humongous mess. So I highly recommend drawing your UI as dynamically as possible. There are some instances where it's just not a good idea and it's just not convenient, but most of the time you will be able to find little optimizations and little ways of doing things that are dynamic. And little side note, I guess, even beyond the scope of UI, I think that you should design all of your scripts modularly because it really saves on a lot of time later down the road. Other than that, I just wanted to say thank you so much for watching the video. If you want to help me out, go ahead and subscribe. I would very much appreciate your support. And hey, I mean, worst case, if you want to take it back, you can always do so. But other than that, peace.